Okay, in section 4.2, it says factoring trinomials. So remember, trinomials means three terms of the form x squared plus bx plus c. And so factoring a trinomial of that form, this one has an a, so it has a number in front of the x squared. This section we won't deal with numbers in front of x squared. We will in the next couple of sections. But when we try to factor that, it's doing FOIL in reverse. Remember, FOIL we did in the last chapter. So FOIL, remember, means first, outside, inside, last. So when we multiply the first terms together, what do we get? X squared. And then the outside terms gives us plus 3x, and the inside terms gives us plus 5x, and the last terms give us plus 15. And then we can combine the two middle terms. So we get x squared plus 8x plus 15. So it says, so then what's the factored form of x squared plus 8x plus 15? How would we write that as a product of two things? What two things can we multiply together to get this as the answer? Yeah, what we just did, right? X plus 5 and x plus 3. When we multiplied those two polynomials together, we got this as the answer. So it says if we have a polynomial in this form where it's all multiplied out, and we want to factor it into two sets of parentheses, so it says recall that the first terms in each set must multiply together to give x squared. So it says with that in mind, what has to go first in each set of parentheses? Yeah, it has to be x times x. That's how we're going to get our x squared. So it says, as in the example at the top of the page, the middle term, so the 8x, comes from combining the outside and inside products. So it said what we put last in each set of parentheses must multiply together to give the c, the number that's at the end. So the number at the end here was 15. So whatever we put at the end of the parentheses, those two numbers have to multiply together to give 15. So our only choices are 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. So it says the idea is to choose factors of c that add up to the middle term, because when we do FOIL, that's what we do is combine those two. So we had a 3x and a 5x. Using those numbers, that gave us the 8x. So it says if you think you're done, if you think you've got something factored, you can always use FOIL to check to see if your answer is right, and you should just get back what you started with. So we want to use that idea here. So the only way we're going to get x squared is x times x. So we're looking for two numbers now that multiply together to give 8 and add up to 6. Well, the only two numbers I can multiply to get 8 are 1 and 8 and 2 and 4, which, yeah, 2 and 4, they add up to 6. And then if you wanted, you can always check by doing FOIL. First is x squared, outside is 4x, inside is plus 2x, and last is plus 8. And then when you combine these two terms, you get plus 6x. And that's what we started with. So I know my answer is right. Okay, so now we want to look at how we can use signs to help us. It's not always going to be the case that everything is positive. Okay, so if everything is positive, it's always going to be x plus a number, x plus a number. If everything is positive to begin with, everything is positive when you factor it. So the signs in parentheses are both positive. Okay, now this one, we know we're going to start with x and x. Whatever comes after the x, those numbers have to multiply together to give plus c, and then when we combine outside and inside terms, or when we add them together, we want it to be negative b. So is it going to be 2 pluses, 2 minuses, or one of each? Okay, so if I did plus a number and then minus a number, so I have a positive times a negative, what's that going to give me? A negative, but it says it has to multiply to give me a positive. So it has to be two negatives. So if the last sign is plus, the two parentheses have the same sign. They're either two pluses or two minuses, and it's whatever the sign is in the middle is what they both are. Okay. So let's look at if it has a plus first and a minus second. So it still has to start out with x and x. Whatever numbers I write here, when I multiply them, I want to get minus c. So do I need two pluses, two minuses, or one of each? It has to be one of each. If you put two pluses, they multiply to be a positive. If you put two minuses, they multiply to be a positive. The only way is to have one positive and one negative. And it doesn't matter whether you put the plus first and the minus second or vice versa. So 1 plus 1 minus. And what about this last one? What are the signs going to be? Both negative? Okay, so if we had x minus a number, x minus a number. So, yeah, that would give us a positive number for the last one. So the only way to have two numbers multiply together to give us a negative is to have one positive and one negative. And again, it doesn't matter what order you put them in. So if it ever ends in a minus, it's always one of each. If it ends in a plus, they're the same. It's either two pluses or two minuses, and just look at what's in the middle to decide. So it says in any of those four cases, the last numbers have to multiply together to give C, but they must be chosen so that the outside and inside products combine to give the correct middle term. So that's actually what the last problem was having us get ready for in the section 4.1. So we're trying to find what numbers multiply together to give the last one and add up. This is like their middle term. So if the last number was 20, we needed two positives, right? And if they were supposed to add up to 9, it was 4 and 5. If we wanted them to multiply to 16 and add to negative 10, so here's a positive number, both signs are negative, right? So if it ends in a positive number, they're either 2 plus or 2 minus. If it would end in a negative number, it's one of each. So this is kind of what we're using to try to figure out how to factor these. So it's going to be y and y in this problem. What are our signs going to be? 2 pluses, 2 minuses, one of each. 2 minuses. The last one is plus, so it's the same sign both times. It's whatever's in the middle. And there's only one way to factor 11. That's 1 times 11. Do negative 1 and negative 11 add up to negative 12? Yeah. So if negative 1 and negative 11 multiply to positive 11 and add up to the middle number, then that's the right way to factor it. If you weren't sure, what could you do to check? FOIL. Okay, so 8, it's going to be x and x. What are our signs? 2 pluses, 2 minuses, one of each. One of each. If the last one's negative, we always have 1 plus and 1 minus. So we want to find factors of 30, 1 positive and 1 negative. So factors of 30, 1 positive, 1 negative. And what do they have to add up to? Right, add up to negative 1, the coefficient of the middle term. So think of all the ways to factor 30. There are lots of them. 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. That's all the ways to factor it. The only ones that I could possibly use to get a 1 are 5 and 6. And which one will have to be negative? If we want them to add up to a negative number, then the bigger number has to be negative. So the 6 has to go with the minus, and the 5 goes with the plus. Okay, so 10, again, it's going to start with x and x. What are our signs? 1 positive and 1 negative. So factors of 32, 1 and 32, 2 and 16, 4 and 8. 1 positive and 1 negative. And what do we want them to add up to? Right, we want them to add up to 4. And we want them to add up to positive 4. So which pair is going to work? Yeah, 4 and 8 is the only one that will work. And which one should be positive? The 8. If we want them to add up to a positive number, the bigger number should be positive, right? So plus 8 minus 4. Okay, so if we can factor this one, it's got to be x and x. What would our signs have to be? Both minus. And, well, there's only one way to factor 5. That's 1 times 5. Will that give me the negative 7? No. That would give us a negative 6. So it says if it can't be factored, write prime. So this one can't be factored. So it's prime. Now 14, we have 2 different variables in there. We have x's and y's. But if I have to get x squared first, it's still got to be x and x. What are the signs going to be? Yeah, both plus, everything's positive. So if I first just focus on the numbers, we want factors of 8 that are both positive that add up to 6. 2 and 4, 4 and 2. Okay, so I can put plus 4 plus 2, but what's missing from the problem? The y's, right? And how should I put the y's in there? Yeah, 4y and 2y, because then when we multiply 4y times 2y, that will give us the 8y squared. Okay, something's different about 16. It's not just y squared anymore. So what should go first in each set of parentheses so that I get y to the 4th? Yeah, y squared will go first both times. And our sign's going to be 2 pluses, 2 minuses, or 1 of each? 1 of each, since the last one is negative. And so we want factors of 70. So 1 positive, 1 negative, that add up to what? Right. That add up to negative 3. Okay, so, well, we can do 1 and 70. That's not going to work. 2 and 35, not going to work. 7 plus 0 is 7. That's not a factor of 3. Right. You could try 5, but the easiest way to factor it is 7 times 10. And those differ by 3. Which one should be negative? The 10. We want the bigger one to be negative since we want them to add up to a negative. What's wrong with the way they've written number 20? It's what? Yeah, we have to have the q squared first. So first we're going to put that one. Q squared plus 6q minus 27. So when we factor it, we know it's going to be q and q. What are our signs going to be? Plus and minus. The last one's negative, so we need 1 of each. And so the ways to factor 27, there are only 2 ways. 1 and 27 or 3 and 9. And we want factors that add up to what? Right, we want them to add up to 6. So 1 and 27 isn't going to work. And which one should be positive? The 9, because if the sum is positive, the bigger number should be positive. And so the next few problems are, it's the same idea, except for we see numbers in front of x squared, which I said we wouldn't have to deal with in this section. But it says the problems usually have a GCF. So it says factor out the GCF before trying to do the FOIL in reverse. So remember, the GCF can't be bigger than any of the numbers in the list. So the thing to try is 3. Does 3 go into everything? Yeah. So if we factor that out, then it's just x squared plus, what, 10x plus 21. So now it's just plain old x squared. So x, and everything's positive. And the only ways to factor 21 are 1 and 21 and 3 and 7. And we want our factors to add up to what? 10. So 3 and 7 add up to 10. Okay, 38, again, has a number in front of x squared. Does 4 go into everything in that? Yes, so we'll factor out the 4, and we're left with what? X squared minus x minus 12. Okay, so now it's just x squared, so we can deal with x and x. And what are our signs? Plus and minus. And the ways to factor 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. We want our factors to add up to what? Negative 1. So we add to negative 1. So which pair works? 3 and 4. And which one should be negative? The 4. I think, let's see. Let me see what's on group work for 4. 2. What did I do with it? There you go. Okay, I think I'm gonna, let's see. I think maybe I'll just do, maybe this one, and then I'll let you do group work. Okay, so this one has a 3 in front of the x squared, so I want to see if 3 goes into everything. Obviously it goes into 3. What about 126? 1 plus 2 plus 6 is 9, so 3 goes into it. And can I factor out anything besides a 3? An x. So then what would be left in the first term? X squared plus x minus 42. So that's going to be x and x. What are our signs? Plus and minus. Okay, the ways to factor 42, 1 and 42, 2 and 21, 3 and 14, 4 doesn't go in, 5 doesn't, 6 and 7. And we want our factors to add up to what? 1. And 1's positive and 1's negative. So the only way is 6 and 7. And which one should be positive? The 7.